proceed right now? Okay. Easy go. Right, okay. Do you want it bright? Right.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'll make it just 6 o'clock, if we could make a start. Just for members of the public, this meeting will actually be streamed. So if you don't want to be in the picture, which it might catch you occasionally, could you see the clerk and they'll make sure that you aren't ever focused on any picture? Yeah. If we could then move on to the agenda items. And the first item is apologies for absence.
We received apologies from Councillor Lancaster, Surgeon, and Hussain and Clint Vivian.
Thank you. And I think we have substitutes. Are we in Councillor Harrison?
Councillor Harrison's here to sub.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Has anybody got any declarations of interest in any matter that's on the agenda? No, thanks very much indeed. Urgent business. I've not been notified of any urgent business.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Public question times. I believe we did receive 2 questions, but they were ruled inadmissible because they were to do with an item on the agenda this evening. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated, could I move them as a correct record? Is that seconded? Thank you. Any questions arising from those? No, thanks very much indeed. If I could just change the agenda items for a second, because I think it could have a material effect on any decisions that we might make on some of them. And I would just move to item 9 and 10, which is a decision of the planning inspector on an application that we turned down. It was subsequently appealed, and what happened at the appeal was that although the inspector agreed with us that it should be refused, it finished up there was awarded costs against us. And if I could possibly pass over to Martin, who will outline the reasons for that.
Thanks very much, Chair. So, yes, this has been introduced. This, and for the avoidance of any doubt, this is relating to an application that was determined by the Planning Committee in September last year. And it was for development at 298 Moston Lane East. And it concerned the change of use of the residential dwelling to a residential institution, along with a single-storey and first-floor rear extensions. The application was recommended for approval, and at that planning committee meeting on the 15th of September, the application was refused against officer recommendation. What's essentially, sorry, that was for 5 individual reasons. What subsequently happened is the appellant so the applicant became an appellant by taking that application to appeal to the planning inspectorate, and also applied for costs on the grounds that the council had acted unreasonably in arriving at the decision it had. So the application was actually refused for 5 reasons, as I said. That was the living conditions on the adjoining property at number 300 Moston Lane East, arising from the single-storey rear extension that was proposed. The second reason was that the rear extension along the boundary with number 298, 296 Moston Lane East, relating to the character and appearance of the scheme. The third was relating to issues around waste storage and bin provision. The fourth was regarding the loss of a family home, and the fifth was about noise and disturbance arising from the proposed use. So having regard to the history of the site, which was covered in the report at the time, the inspector, we've essentially got two decisions from the Planning Inspectorate. One is the decision on whether the scheme has been dismissed or allowed. So the actual appeal itself has been dismissed, but that was purely on the grounds of the impact of the single-storey extension along the boundary with number 296, number 300, correct myself there. And the inspector concluded that refusing the application on the grounds of its impact on number 296, including the waste condition, the waste refusal reason, and noise and disturbance, amounted to unreasonable behaviour from the local planning authority, and that's resulted in an award of costs being made against the council. So, in short, Chair, the appellant's been invited to submit their claim for costs to the council, which obviously need to be met. Thank you.
Has anybody got any questions there? Want further clarification on the particular matter? Councillor Allendine.
So if it comes back to us, presumably, then there is still, unless the application has changed, it would still, like, we have confirmation of particular grounds. So that's what would need to be addressed by any future application. Right.
Yes, in short, yes, the primary reason for the appeal being dismissed now relates to the impact of the single-storey rear extension along the boundary with number 300 Moston Lane East.
I think that sorry, Councillor Open.
Sorry, Chair, do we get a chance to challenge the costs, or is it just, what happens with that?
So the costs decision is final from the inspectorate. They have identified unreasonable behaviour, as they phrase it, in the decision. The next stage is that the appellant will set out what costs they incurred in going through the appeal process, the additional cost that they shouldn't have been put through, essentially, in the inspector's view, because that was unreasonable.
But do we get to challenge them?
We would.
The figure that comes through,
yeah, so the extent of the costs are currently unknown. So when we invite details, we would expect some evidence of the costs that have been incurred, so whether it's invoices or whatnot. We'd need some evidence to corroborate and justify the extent of any pounds and pence figure.
I think the reason that I've brought this forward is that I think we have to be really circumspect on the conditions that we actually refuse any application on, and that it makes and stands up to scrutiny by the inspector and has full planning reasons behind it. Otherwise, the authority obviously can be subjected to very significant costs, and it's just really a reminder. It's not I'm not trying to inhibit anybody, but that's the thing that it's not a matter of throwing everything against an application if we're going to refuse it, but being mindful that we really have to follow planning law and the planning conditions that are recommended to us. Is there any further comments anybody would like to make? Okay, thank you very much indeed. If we could then move on back to the run of the agenda, and it's the first application that we'll deal with, and that's land at Oldham Lane, Lees, and this is a reserved matter application for the erection of 234 dwellings with associated vehicular access and parking, private amenity space and landscaping pursuant to the hybrid planning permission And initially, could I ask the planning officer, Mr. Dickman, to outline the application to us?
Right. Thank you, Chair. I think when members look through the report, you'll see that obviously there is quite an extensive history to this site. Some of you may have been around back in 2019, 2017 even, and during lockdown periods where we dealt with an amendment application to this particular scheme as well. So some of you may be aware of that. But just to give a little bit of brief background, this is an application, it was a hybrid application, so that's a type where it includes full detailed elements of a scheme and outline elements, which are obviously those where you're really just looking at the principle of that type of development on the site. In this instance, the full detailed element of it was the construction of a new link road which would serve the development as proposed. The outline element of it, so the bit that's just been approved in principle, relates to the residential use itself of part of the site. The current application is for the approval of reserved matters in connection with that outline application. And the reserved matters themselves are set out in the report, which is basic appearance, landscaping, layout, scale of the development itself. So what we need to be clear of before we start is that what committee are being asked to determine is only those issues and only those aspects. You're not being given the opportunity to reconsider the principle of development of the site. It's not an opportunity to consider the link road and whether that is suitable or not. Those decisions have already been taken. The outline approval also includes a number of conditions. So these cover the things that you'll often be aware of: drainage issues, land contamination issues, ecology and so forth. They similarly are subject to a separate process of consideration to this application. So there are currently two currently undetermined applications dealing with those matters. Therefore, they're not relevant to this scheme. So for instance, drainage of the site is dealt with under that process, not under the reserved matters element of the scheme. Similarly, it's not possible to impose conditions of principle of this stage unless they were included at the outline stage. So there's a few elements you'll see in that, and I'll comment on a few of those as we go along. So it's just really to give you a little bit of the background to the scheme. This is the site itself. So it's quite an extensive site. I appreciate it's not a very good display showing there, but essentially there's residential development already to the north of the site, to the west of the site, and across a valley of Thornley Brook to the east of the site, with open land to the southeast. To the north of the site is the main valley of Thornley Brook, which is a large wooded area. There's some recreational routes through there. That area is outside the particular development site, so that's outside the area that you'll see some of this a little bit better. So as you can possibly see on there, this is generally the site coming round. The link road comes through approximately there through the site, and there are a couple of features on the site itself. So generally you'll see it's kind of pasture type land in general, but there is a tributary of the brook which cuts down the middle of the site. The brook itself runs in the kind of wooded area at the north of the site and then cuts round in a southeasterly direction. This is where the land levels fall away. So this main site is effectively on a plateau above the valley of the brook itself. The access, as I say, will cut through the site and there'll be a new access point from the link road onto Knowles Lane itself. These are just a few sort of general panoramic views if you've not particularly been to the site previously, just giving an indication of its current condition. And this is the proposed site layout. And as I say, this is the new link road cutting through the site. Access to the development will be off that link road. The main part obviously is to the east, which is all this, served off the single access point, and then obviously the various roads within that. And there's a smaller element to the west of that, which again comes off that road. I'll show this a little bit more detail to come down. There are a group of 8 properties that front onto Knowles Lane itself, and they are served off a new single access point. This will give you details of the phasing which is proposed for the site. So the first phase is this particular area of the site, which includes the properties fronting onto Knowles Lane and these other areas. You'll see in the report that an assessment has been carried out of the traffic implications of a number of dwellings. So obviously we're dealing with 234 in total on the site, as to how many of those could be served without the need for the link road to be put in. And that figure's set out in the report, 45, so these will generally be in this area of the site. Before the subsequent areas get developed, the link road has to be provided in its entirety through the site. So as you can see, the main area to the east of the site, given the scale of development, it's probably some way down the line if permission's granted before that starts coming forward for development. These just give you, as the scheme, as part of the outline approval, there was a requirement for affordable housing provision on the site. This scheme includes less houses than that scheme, but still a pro rata requirement for affordable housing. And as you can see, there are groups scattered around the site itself to try and avoid this kind of ghettoisation of properties. And many of the house types, again you'll see in the report, actually reflect the same as the private for sale houses as well. So there's no suggestion there that you know, there'll be a different appearance within the development based on tenure. These are just giving you some of the house types that are included on the site. There are 15 different types of house. One issue that's obviously been raised in the reports is about the scale of them in terms of how many bedrooms these have, and I'll just cover that briefly later on. Another issue that's been covered is about the materials that are being used on the site. And what you can see here, there's a mix of properties, different colours, and these indicate what materials can be used, so either brick or artificial stone with different roof tiles, so either red roofs or grey roofs on there. The artificial stone ones are in this area of the site. So this includes the ones fronting onto Knowles Lane, where there are some more traditional properties that are built in stone. Having said that, you know, the character of the area is really mixed. You've got red brick properties and so forth. And also, do a little bit more detail shortly, this area of the site in the corner, which is closest to the near listed buildings, which are close to the site. Again, those are being provided in the stone finish. And again, these are just giving, again, an indication of those various street scenes. And I think what it also does show you, the topography across the site isn't level. There's variations in that, which obviously adds to the street scene. This is the area near where the listed buildings are. So they're on this side, on the left-hand side, and the new development will be more over here to the right. And you can see the character of the area in between, and there is a proposal for additional landscaping within that area. And these are the distances away from them. So there's been a suggestion from representations that the houses themselves should be in natural stone because of this relationship. But as you can see, there is a significant distance across there. There is no requirement for use of natural stone. It's not in a conservation area, but the attempt has been made to reflect that kind of traditional style. So if you're viewing the two sites from a vantage point above, you don't see them in the same context, and for that reason we consider that the proposed materials are acceptable on this site. As you're moving towards the properties that front onto Knowles Lane, and as you can see, this is the point where the new link road access will come through. And you can see again some of the existing properties on the opposite side of the road. This is a detail showing the frontage properties. And as you can see, there's a single vehicular access point that would serve those. At the moment, there is a dry stone wall along the frontage of the site. There is a requirement for that to be reinstated, obviously allowing for visibility. It's quite a low wall in the future. But perhaps also important, there is no footway at the moment fronting that side of the site. And this way, as you head in a southeasterly direction, takes you towards the nearby school. So as part of the scheme, there is a proposal for a new footway which will link all the way through. So effectively, if you're walking from the west of the site along Knowles Lane, at the moment you have to cross over onto the south side. That will be provided all the way through. That is clearly an improvement generally, not just to serve this particular development. Again, separation distances to the properties over the road more than exceed the required standards. Again, that's what it shows you. Again, you can see the wall that's there at the moment. You can see that there is no footway on that side of the road at present. These are just showing the area to the west of the road. And again, you'll see that existing properties here, terrace properties, some distance across the site, and there is existing tree planting in those areas. Similarly to the north of the site, it's quite densely planted area, and that is not proposed to be changed as part of the scheme. So this, again, this is just the visuals showing that area. Those you can see are the existing properties fronting onto Knowles Lane. And this is the area to the northwest where you can see again, beyond the kind of platform of the development, you can see that there's established planting around those areas. The other major element of the site is that the two public rights of way that currently cross the site. So these emerge from the north, and then one comes, I'll show you a little bit more detail shortly. These are the two routes that will come through as proposed. So they come from the north, cut through what is essentially the side of the kind of tributary valley through the site. This is a change from the original submitted scheme in response to representations from local residents and from the Ramblers themselves. Two routes they could then take, so this is part of the existing route which will remain open through the site, so at the moment it would cut in a straight line. But also there is a provision of a new footpath link, and I understand this was provided in coordination again with the school to improve access routes, which would allow direct access through to the site and bring you out closer to the school. The second point takes you round the outside of the development site. Again, originally, this was proposed to run along the estate road. So see the shortest route through the site, but clearly not a convivial one. So that now goes through, and as members will be well aware, separate to the planning process, there is a need for a separate diversion order to be applied for those changes. So that's showing you the existing, effectively the existing route, effectively just a field footpath. The new route, which will cut round these areas, will be wider. It will have a sealed surface to it as well. So it improves access, particularly in inclement weather, for users of that path. Again, as you see, originally it would have cut through there. It now goes around the outside of the site and emerges in the original position. So what these are showing now are just the route. So again, as you come in from the north, this is how you move onto the site. So you actually cut up and the levels sort of rise up into the site. This shows you the landscape around. So this is like the lower level as you cut around that footpath as you cross the site. Again, just a few views of that, and we're just going further around. That's you can just make out the existing route of the path. And you can see some of the changes in topography again across the site. This shows the relationship with existing housing to the east of the site, which is on the other side of the Brook Valley. And you can see the separation distances similarly are far in excess of those required for normal privacy standards. This is showing you the second route, and this runs again on a separate pathway, so segregated from the roadway itself and the private driveways alongside the valley. So users of that still have an open aspect on one side of that route. And then as you come further down, you can see this route continues. There's not, obviously there's no route through there at the moment. So that gives you an option, or perhaps if you were going westerly direction, you can still utilise the existing routes. This area, and just see in the corner, is the leaps. This is the local play area in the site, which is, again, you can see is connected to the footpath network through the site. This is just during the valley, so this is what I was referring to. So this is what breaks up those two elements of the scheme. This is showing sections through the footpath which runs around the outside of the site. And as you can see, so I've seen some new planting on the development side. There are elements where there are some existing trees, and I'm sure I might get asked a question about that at the moment, but obviously not on the old distance. So where one of the sections through is, there are some trees, which is why that indicates tree planting on either side. In other areas, there is some additional tree planting proposed, but at the moment, what we're not looking for is to enclose that footpath. So there are views that would still be available for users from that in the easterly direction. These are just showing, so that's the exist on the left-hand side, that's the existing, where the footpath comes out at the moment onto Knowles Lane, and on the right-hand side is where the new route would come out. This is the locally equipped area of play, which is provided in the site, and you'll see in some of the representations that we've made that this is mainly for a particular young age of children, and that there is no provision that's been made elsewhere on the site, notwithstanding obviously more general recreational facilities that will be available both obviously at the moment through the new through the existing areas to the north of the site, the recreational areas there, and the new footpath routes are being provided. It has to be clear that this provision is reflective of what was on the hybrid outline approval. So there was no conditional requirement for provision beyond this, and therefore this is the extent of the scheme that's provided. It's in a position which, I say, is fairly central on the site. There have been suggestions of moving this further to the east, but there is a parcel of land, which again is part of that early approval, which is going to be allocated to the school, which allows for the school expansion. So that area is not available for this. And also, whilst you make it nearer to some future residents, you move it away from others. So we consider that this is an appropriate area to use. Artistic license, I appreciate on this, but it's just to give you that relationship of what that play area would be, and the landscaping scheme which is proposed throughout the site as well, and its relationship with the houses, which, although there's separation to that, because they've got a gap of green space in between, clearly allows for informal supervision as well of those areas. So that's the area roughly in the centre of the site. So that's the scheme as proposed that's going forward. As I say, the principle of that is okay. What members are looking at is the detailed layouts of that and the type of properties in terms of their design, their relationship to the surrounding area, and whether they are appropriate for that particular site. So as you see some of it's a generally undulating topography of the site, and that helps with some of the levels. It helps with the road layout. As you can see, there are no bland straight runs of houses throughout the site. The house types are mixed around the site as well, so it gives, as any modern housing estate would have, in that context, a fairly interesting street scene across there, avoiding that monotony. Where we've got properties that don't directly front onto highways, they've been designed in a way that they have fenestration on the street scene, so you don't end up with blank gables. And similarly, in a very small number of cases, you have screen gardens. Again, rather than the standard Whaley Lap fencing, they will have walls built in the materials to match the site as well. So in that context, you'll see from the report, the officers are satisfied that the design, layout of the scheme actually provides an appropriate form of development on this site. It has regard to its surroundings. Properties where they are on the boundaries of the site face out, so you avoid screen gardens when viewed from the open space areas across the site. 15 different types of housing. They are predominantly 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses, predominantly semi-detached, detached properties. And as I say, that issue has been raised in the representations. There is no requirement on the outline approval for a particular mix of properties, and whilst councils are encouraging national guidance to achieve that, there is no requirement within a specific individual site to do that. There was a mention at the outline stage of what's termed aspirational housing on the site, so which is a shortage of housing in a particular area for a type of development. This is not unusual in the area. You can look round, see the existing neighbouring developments nearby. There are similar types of scheme which have a fairly mono house type in terms of size and so forth to them. In terms of amenity issues, again, one issue that has been raised is about the national space standards, which obviously members will have come across before. It's explained in detail in the report that there are some elements of these schemes that don't fully comply with that standard. What it explains is that they tend to happen in the, so if you've got a 5-bedroom house, it tends to be the 5th bedroom and the 4th bedroom. If you've got a 3-bedroom, it's the 3-bedroom. In terms of the overall size of the houses, they all either meet or exceed the standard, which obviously then you can draw a conclusion from that, that where some of the rooms are slightly smaller than standard, that's because the space is taken up by other bedrooms, so the main bedrooms tend to be larger. In terms of those standards, whilst we encourage that to be completely applied on a development, it has to form part of a local plan policy. It will form part of your local plan policy, but that plan, as you well know, is well under preparation. So at the present time, the guidance is clear that you can't impose. But even then, what you've got to look at is the amenity. What is that trying to achieve? It's trying to achieve a decent standard of amenity for those residents. And in effect, as I say, the overall size of the properties, they meet those standards. Somebody might, you know, the bedroom might be slightly smaller than it would meet, but then other bedrooms are bigger than that. If you choose to move into that house, you know, that's your choice of how you would want that configuration. It's not really for the council to do that. If the buildings were much smaller, then we would obviously want to push that element. But, and I suppose this goes back to the earlier issue of, you know, it doesn't strictly meet what you might want to achieve, but that of itself isn't a justification for refusing a development unless you can provide a strong reason as to why that should be the case. And as I say, because the overall amenity in those units is provided. And as we all know, as planners and planning committee, if somebody moves into a house and they want to find more accommodation, they come back to us and they build an extension on the house. It's an inevitability, but it allows for that in the future. In terms of highways and parking, as I say, the principle of the access to the site, that's not now open for reconsideration. That was part of the previous approval. In terms of on-site parking provision, there's a concern that obviously people these days seem to be obsessed with their cars, and therefore you could have, say, a 4-bedroom house that might have 3 cars or even 4 cars to it. Why don't we provide that within the layout of the site? Well, the first answer to that is that that's not universal. It's because you have a 3-bedroom house doesn't mean you've got 3 cars and so forth. But also, we're looking at the design of these houses. What we want to avoid is a frontage to a site which is basically just a hard surface. And if you require that to be provided on a building, and it's not actually needed, you know, I'd rather have a garden area for that. It improves the appearance of the property. Again, as with the extensions, we know that if people subsequently want to have an enlarged driveway on their property, quite often under permitted development rights, they will do so. So they would do that, but providing something that's not necessarily needed, I think, has an adverse street scene element to this. And again, as my colleague Wendy often mentions, there are no adopted standards for parking. And we're satisfied that each of these units, for the size of unit, has adequate off-street parking. It also has provision, as we know, on any housing estate, for vehicles to park on the carriageway without causing obstruction. The main highways within the development, they all meet the required standards for adoption. There are some private driveways. They don't meet that same standard because obviously they won't be adopted. A refuse vehicle, for instance, wouldn't be able to get down there, turn around and come out again. But again, we know that's not the case. You know, I live on a cul-de-sac. The refuse vehicle always reverses down. So the question is, could they be adequately serviced for that or for deliveries and so forth? Well, the answer to that is yes, they can. And the highway officer has looked at those layouts. And has, in fact, made quite a few changes to the details of that as part of the application proposal itself. So again, we're satisfied that that meets it. I've mentioned about the footpaths around the site. This is an example of where representations have made a difference to the development site, and to my mind certainly have made an improvement to that. Obviously the footpaths won't be like they are now, they won't cross an open field, but again, what you're looking at is that change in the context of a residential scheme that's already been granted approval. The details of the tree planting around the site, again, looked at by your trees officer. He's satisfied that it makes adequate provision. There aren't a lot of trees on this part of the site, in any case, as you saw from the visuals, but there is substantial additional planting both within the scheme and external to the boundaries of the site. One sort of final issue that again was raised about energy efficiency measures, which is obviously a big issue at the moment. The council has an adopted policy that requires 15% improvement over Part L of the building regulations as they were in 2013. The applicant has provided details of that for the initial phases. Many of you may be aware that the building regulations have recently changed, and as part of that change, the requirements will be tightened. So at the moment, the planning scheme, any properties built now have to meet the current standard. Regardless of any planning standards, if the building regs exceed that, they have to exceed the building regs. It may well be if a development of this type takes 3 years, those standards under the building regulations may have tightened up. So they will have to re-look at the measures they put in place to deal with that. At the moment, solar panels are being put forward as the measure for that. You'll see in the conditions there is a phasing requirement in terms of that particular issue. So the ones further down, so if they come forward, say in 18 months' time, they will have to come back to us for the later phases to look at, does it meet the required standards, does it meet the council standards under planning in particular to do that. We've also got a requirement that each of these properties will have the infrastructure put in place for electric vehicle charging points. So they all have, each one of these units all has individual driveways. So they all have access, off-road access, and that provision will be standard. And again, that's recommended as a condition of the development. So in conclusion, as I say, this is about that design, that layout, the design, the relationship of the houses in that context, and whether that is acceptable. And in terms of the layout put forward and the improvements that have taken place during the processing of the application, your officers consider that is the case and recommend approval, subject to the conditions set out in the report. And just to reiterate, they're not the only conditions. The applicant still needs to comply with all the conditions that are associated with the original hybrid outline application as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Dickman. Has anybody got any questions as a planning officer? Councillor Alan Downey.
Thank you. In the just before the conclusion, we have some information about the Coal Authority and the mine working, which says that the Coal Authority has said they're not in a position to confirm any necessary proposed protection measures are satisfactory. Just could you, so if they've indicated that it's not satisfactory or that they can't confirm it's satisfactory, why is there not a condition or information to that effect?
The answer to that is that there is a condition. It's condition 11 of the outline approval. So it's a matter, it's a bit like the land contamination issue. It's a matter of the principle. So again, they still have to comply with that. If it subsequently turns out that based on the layout that's submitted, you know, some of the houses are in a position where they can't get a licence from the coal authority because the measures they're putting in place are unsatisfactory, they're going to have to come back to us for an amended scheme. But we can't prejudge that at this stage because the coal authority is saying we're not yet convinced. They're not saying it can't be done. And until they do, then we have to judge it on its current merits.
Sorry, to follow up then, and I'm not sure what the procedure is because I only received this just before the meeting. I've got an email from the coal authority to say that they have not been consulted on this application. It specifies that they spoke to the case officer to say they've not been consulted on this application and that previously they'd said they have concerns should the proposed application include a layout within the zone of influence, which I believe it does. My understanding is that the coal authority are a statutory consultee. So can you explain to me why a statutory consultee is saying they've not been consulted on the application?
As I say, this isn't a matter for this application, this is a matter for the outline application. They have been consulted, I have correspondence with them. Their objection goes back to that original consideration of the principle of development of the site. For that reason, a condition was imposed that deals with that matter. So it's ground contamination in that wider sense of, you treat historic mining legacy as ground contamination. So they have been on that. What I've asked questions of the applicant on are the negotiations that they've got, because they've got to negotiate separately to us, they put a scheme forward. As part of those discussions, they're not in agreement at this time. So the coal authority, I'm liaising with the coal authority, so I can actually, provide information that I've had liaison with them about the scheme. So that's how I'm aware of their current approach to the development. So yes, I see the point that's being made, but they are, if you like, their go-ahead of this will be on condition 11. That's when we can sign that off once they say, right, we're fine. As with other landfill gas and so on issues. I don't know what date. Sorry, Councillor. What date is the email that you've got there?
They've sent that today to say that. And they are a statutory consultee, regardless of the fact that they were consulted on the previous application. They should have been consulted on this application, and they have stated that they have not been.
Well, we're presenting the application to you. At this stage, they clearly have been consulted because they've made comments on the application.
If I may, Chair?
Yeah, I don't know where you're going with this, but go on.
Well, I can provide the email to the officers if required.
Are you contradicting the officer in saying that they haven't had that consultation?
The coal authority are contradicting the officer. I'll read it out. Our last letter back to the case officers was dated 23rd, 22, and that was on the planning application reference CND, etc. We also drew the case officer's attention to the fact that we do not appear to have been consulted on application Res 34775921. We did, however, advise the local planning authority that we would have concerns should the application propose a layout which includes built development within the theoretical zone of influence associated with the recorded mine shaft. I'm sorry that I didn't bring this to your attention before the meeting, Chair, but I literally received it just before.
It clearly says that there's a conversation's been had of what you've just said.
On a previous application, yes, not on this application.
If Mr Dickman could...
So, with respect, it's not a previous application, it's the same application, it's the same scheme. The issues of land contamination, drainage and so forth are dealt with under that previous application. That's where we're seeking their views. I'm aware that they don't consider that that design layout is acceptable at the present time. And if the development is subsequently approved on the basis of that layout, and it turns out they can't get the less necessary licence, as with any other separate legislative matter, the development will not be able to progress on that basis. But at the moment, we have no evidence to say that is not achievable. It still needs to be proven, but it is not a justification for saying, is that layout acceptable on the basis of its spatial arrangement?
Sorry, forgive me. I realise that they have been consulted on the outline application. They've not been consulted on this application. My understanding is that they're a statutory consultee. It says in the papers we've received that it gives us their response on this application. It says that on the consultees, at the start of this, there is an indicator where we are, consultations, Coal Authority, further site investigations are required. Now, if that was given on a previous application, that's from a previous application. That's not a consultation on this application. If you're prepared to tell me that statutory consultees don't have to be consulted on this application, if that's the answer, but my understanding is that they should be, and they're saying they haven't been.
Again, these are the same application. It's the same scheme. The issues of land are on the outline. That's where the condition. What we would be asking of the Coal Authority is, are you happy for us to discharge the relevant condition on the outline? That we're not asking them whether they think that that is a nice layout or not. It's not that element of it. Outline reserve matters, they're all part, outline reserve matters, condition discharge, they're all part of the same process. What comes together, what is ultimately a planning permission is that and that together. So you can't separate them from that. The Coal Authority have seen that layout. That's why they're able to make the comments that they are making. So it makes no sense to consult them on the in-principle issue if they're not aware of what the actual development is. And in a way, I'm struggling. I see the point that you're making, but they were consulted because they were consulted on the development. They're aware of that layout, which is why they have made the comments that they subsequently have made. So I'm not quite sure why the assumption is being made that they've not been consulted. The Coal Authority is aware of the scheme. The application before yourselves, we have their response on.
Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the theme of statutory consultees, United Utilities, the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, and the Environment Agency have all highlighted concerns about the details of this development. So there does appear to be a contradiction between what has been presented to us in the report and what is on the planning portal. The correspondence on the planning portal, it contains some still unanswered questions. I'm not sure how the planning officers came to the conclusion there were no objections based on the documents there. There seems to be missing documents and missing correspondence. So one of my questions is, are the planning officers expecting us to make a decision without all the information required? And the second question is, where are the missing documents? Because we don't owe the developers anything, and we shouldn't be accepting substandard proposals. So I don't really understand Mr. Dickman's commitment to the application. There's no reason why we couldn't send this back and say it's not good enough.
Right, well, yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. I think the issues about the drain, the issue about the comments on the website our process is that we do not put consultation responses on the website. And this is precisely an example of why we don't do that. Because consultees respond, and as time goes by, those responses evolve. So, for instance, you might find that the Coal Authority, when initially consulted on something, may object. They say, we need more detail of this, 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 and this. There'll be a subsequent comment from them when they've received those details, and a subsequent comment on those. Unfortunately, the documents that are on the website were an administrative error. They shouldn't have gone on. I haven't taken them, I would normally have said take them back off again because they shouldn't have been there. The reason why I didn't do that is to avoid any accusation of hiding information. The reality is that that information evolves. The reason why we don't put them there, as I say, is because it's to avoid a situation where somebody will say, right, let's refuse this application, there's an objection. Well, that's not the case. We then find, can we overcome that objection? That's what the planning process involves. That's our role, is to see whether solutions can be found, not simply to refuse applications. There is correspondence from the United Utilities confirming that following the submission of the amended information, they are now satisfied with this scheme. They have confirmed no objection. So with respect again, Councillor, the comment that we put in that report in relation to their comments and GMEU are actually accurate. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Woodbine.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So, to summarise that, you expect us to guess before we come into this meeting on what the consultees are going to say or not say, because we've not seen any of the consultations, so how can we make a decision? You can't just tell us in a meeting that that's what they've said if we're not presented with it.
Basically, I think that you are now attacking the trustworthiness of officers in coming forward with not their views, but the information that they've received from consultees. Mr. Dickman has clearly stated...
That's not what I'm doing,
No,
Mr. Chairman.
it is.
It's not. I'm quite simply asking for more information on the application, which we're not being provided with.
Mr. Dickman has explained that along with every other, well, most other elements in developments of this scale and size, you know, our discussions take place till a satisfactory solution is found. And in United Utilities situation, which he's just explained, it clearly said that yes, there was discussions, amendments was made, and United Utilities have corresponded to say the situation is now satisfactory. Mr. Richardson.
Well, I think Councillor Dean summarised it quite well, but I mean, just to reiterate, you've had the report for a week. In the report, it states very clearly, following the submission of amended plans, United Utilities has confirmed that the details are acceptable. So it's set out in the report. If you wanted more information on that, you could have emailed Graham at any point, or myself. But in effect, if you're questioning that, you are questioning the truth, if you like, of what we as officers are saying to you.
So what about the other two consultees that I referenced, the GM Ecology Unit and the Environment Agency?
Well, we'll let Mr. Dickman answer those. I'm sure the answer is very similar to the previous one.
Yeah, the issue in GM Ecology Unit is that in terms of this development site, they are not raising an objection to it. They have asked for further details. Those details are covered, as with the Coal Authority issue, in the conditions of the outline approval. And similarly, that's what they're commenting on. They're commenting on that particular condition. Can we discharge that condition in relation to the development that's now being proposed? So their current view on that, they're not raising issues of principle. We have emails from them saying that they are satisfied. There are details that they need further approval for. So, for instance, protected species. Again, this is a development which will take place over a number of years. You have to update reports as that time goes by. They are aware of that. That's included in the condition that goes forward. There is no outstanding objection from that body or from any other body to this development, i.e. to this reserved matters application. That is a matter of fact. There may be details and they will be dealt with. So, for instance, if we discharge a condition and it is subject to you providing this, say land contamination, you have to provide a validation report to confirm you've put the necessary measures in place afterwards. That's dealt with by the condition. So the same would apply in this instance. But the comments that are made on there, trees officer, ecology unit, environment agency, again, no objection to the drainage scheme. UU, as I say, updated comments on that. The Ramblers have indicated that they're quite happy with one variation, and I'm explained in the report why that isn't feasible to do that. The highway engineer obviously isn't here for herself, but again has confirmed that all the amendments are acceptable. Environment Health have only raised the issue about the construction noise. And the reference to the Coal Authority, again, is there. Further site investigations are required in respect of coal mining legacy features in order to discharge the relevant planning condition. It's there in the report. I've made that absolutely clear what the current position is with each of those consultees as they're coming forward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we've got speakers and obviously there's a debate to take place afterwards. So if I could possibly call the first speaker, the first speaker that I've got is an objector, Jane Barker. What is the process is that you do have 3 minutes, as other speakers do have. You'll be told when there's 30 seconds to go that the other time's almost up, and then if you could conclude. Thanks very much. In your own time.
Thank you, Chair. Setting aside that this development does not meet the local housing needs, this is yet another Knowles Lane application with missing information and unanswered questions. The geo-environmental report that should have been attached to the 2019 application was missing. This report highlighted that the site contains a mine shaft and 2 seams of historic coal workings and is categorised as high risk by the Coal Authority. The Coal Authority told the Planning Department the report was missing, but it was never added to the portal. The Planning Committee never saw it and the community never had a chance to comment on it. 2 further reports have been produced since, which should have been attached to this application. These reports state that some of the houses are located within the zone of influence of the mine shaft and are at risk of subsidence. Other properties overlie the historic coal workings. Initially, the shaft was to be stabilised and capped, but this appears to have been changed to just building a robust fence around the entrance, which it is stated can't be found. How exactly does a fence prevent subsidence? This is dangerous. The officer's report states that the Coal Authority won't sign off on the mitigation plan. So why won't they sign this off? Where is the response from the Coal Authority and why hasn't it appeared on the planning portal? The Coal Authority may insist on no build zones, which means that the layout can't be finalised and this can't be shunted off into a conditions discharged application. The developer is proposing to grout fill the historic coal workings, so that's tonnes and tonnes of cement and aggregate pumped into underground seams, even though the Coal Authority state that this is not their preferred method of stabilising the ground. Layers of peat are being removed from across the site, so can this site really be described as sustainable development? Where are the responses to the concerns raised by the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit and the Environment Agency? United Utilities stated an outright objection to the plans and no new information has been provided. All we have is the officer's report saying everything is okay. For the sake of transparency, the correspondence should be added to the planning portal for everyone to see. Some of the homes don't meet the government space standards for new homes. This is a new development. Why don't all the homes meet the national space standards? And where is the community consultation that should have taken place under the design code and NPPF 127 and 129? The inclusion of a design code carried weight in the original decision and was supposed to be included in the conditions. We have been told in writing that the council does not have the manpower to monitor the site properly. They are relying on local residents to report breaches, and this is not good enough. I urge the committee to ask questions on this application. It is not as clear-cut as the planning officer would have you believe. And to finish, if you ordered a sirloin steak in a restaurant and were served a Savoy sausage, you'd send it back. This application is the equivalent of the Savoy sausage and should be sent back until all the outstanding questions have been answered. This development should deliver the very best, considering everything that the community will lose. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions of the speaker? No? Okay, thanks very much indeed. If I could now go to Thomas Ralph, is it, who's speaking on behalf of the applicant?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name is Thomas Ralph and I'm the Land and Planning Manager for Russell Homes, the applicant. We strongly support your officer's recommendations to approve these reserved matters for 234 dwellings alongside associated works. We have worked positively with officers over the duration of the application to create an attractive new place for sustainable family living, which is set within a well-planned landscape green infrastructure network. We have also worked hard to ensure that the scheme is in full compliance with the parameters already approved under the hybrid planning permission. Since the application was submitted, it has evolved through discussions with officers, statutory consultees, as well as having taken on board comments from residents. The approved hybrid planning permission sets clear parameters about securing best practice in urban landscaping and ecological design. The proposals before you follow those ethos and those parameters. The scheme delivers a range of new family homes, including 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedrooms in line with the Council's adopted housing policy, and are based on award-winning house types, including bespoke features and styles. The house types are built to cater for all family needs and are adaptable to the new modern working from home. All homes on the development, as noted by officers, will deliver upon energy reduction targets and building regulations and provide electric charging infrastructure. The scheme has been thoroughly tested and reviewed by the Council's Highways Department, who have confirmed that the layout meets all of the Council's requirements. This includes parking provision, turning facilities and refuse access. Furthermore, as noted by your officer, the initial diverted routes for footpaths 25 and 27 through the site have been amended and relocated to the periphery of the 2 western parcels at the request of residents and statutory consultees. In summary, this reserved matters application meets all of the requirements and the parameters established by the hybrid planning permission. It accords with all of the agreed obligations and will deliver upon the identified key benefits previously agreed by the Council. The delivery of 850 new trees, 2,700 metres of new hedgerow species to enhance biodiversity across the site, commitment to the land to St Agnes School, which will be fenced, landscaped and surfaced to a treatment of their choosing. We have also, at the request of the school, added an additional footpath link to the south, as noted by your officer. We are upgrading the footpath along the frontage of Knoll Lane, again noted by your officer. We will fundamentally delivering 53 affordable homes across the site, which was considered a key benefit of the scheme once approved, a provision of a locally equipped area of play, and a total of 5.1 hectares of open space across the development. Therefore, we politely request that members follow the officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Alan Downey.
Sorry, Brad Penny. Thank you, Chair. Just regards to the NSSS sort of rooms, because these are new builds. Just in terms of maximising that amenity and therefore, you know, improving the benefit of this development, could you explain why they don't meet those standards? Is there a specific reason why on new homes they wouldn't?
As noted by the Officer Councillor, the houses proposed all meet the gross internal areas of the NSS standards. It's just some bedrooms that are marginally below the provision that's set out by the standards. This is based on our feedback from customers who don't always want to use bedrooms now. They would like to use them for potential studies or working from home offices or other reasons within the household. The properties themselves do in some instances far exceed the standard, and in some cases 30%. It's just now what we are seeing from customers and across the board that is now what is being sought after with a new home, and as said, people will come and purchase properties on that basis.
Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is if the developers are comfortable allowing properties to be built on unstable land over a mine shaft at risk of subsidence, and which the Coal Authority have and will not approve of. Thank you.
Sorry, what was the question?
I think the question, the question.
I can read it again, Mr. Chairman. I thought it was quite a simple question, but I'll read it again. My question is if the developers are comfortable allowing properties to be built on unstable land over a mine shaft, which is at risk of subsidence, and which the Coal Authority have and will not approve of.
I don't know whether you want to respond to that.
We can do, Councillor. As noted by Officer, this is being dealt with by a separate discharge condition application. We have to secure permits from the Coal Authority to do the works. The further site investigation required is to actually identify whether there is a mine in place. It is a legacy mine, so there may not be a mine in place when the site investigations are concluded. However, there are appropriate mitigation measures that could be undertaken, such as grouting. It is a very common place for mine shafts to be located on development sites for the legacy of Lancashire mining across Greater Manchester. So this is not uncommon. As I say, we will have to go through the permit procedure, and all mitigation measures will potentially include additional foundations, structures that we will provide, as noted, when the Coal Authority, review further.
Is there any further questions of the speaker? No? Right, the next speaker is Councillor Kenyon as a ward councillor. Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the communities of Groton, Springhead and Lees. There's people here today in support of what I have to say, and popular feelings have always run high on this development. But let me reassure you about what you're being asked to do today. Outline planning has been given for the development. We are not here objecting to that. This is reserved matters, where all the detail is submitted: appearance, access, layout and scale, which you will give a considered decision upon. The officer and applicant today have made a calm and well-seasoned argument, which I'm sure many of you on the face of it will find persuasive. I'm here today not to ask you to ignore the officer, but to demand better, not just for my constituents, but for all our constituents. This is the reserved matter stage, where the detail is meant to be ironed out and presented, where you have enough information to give your decision. What it is not, and this is what the developer's application boils down to, is a blank cheque, where the developer fills in the details later and comes back to the officer for a conditions discharge at the end of the process. There's a lot of vital detail missing, and let's gloss over the fact that it doesn't meet our local plan policy on different house types, or the parking and road layout isn't in line with guidance, or the fact that many of the bedrooms are too small, or the fact that the developer denied they'd started work on site and was later forced to admit that they had. Let's instead address the major uncertainties. The coal mine, which the Coal Authority has warned the developers about, has not been dealt with. Safety of the mine openings, homes in the subsidence zone, and method for dealing with the subsidence are all unapproved, which means they cannot decide on the final layout of the site, the number of homes and the future safety of the site. Is a fence really good enough? How many homes will be in the subsidence zone? Which all cast doubt on the viability of the development. As an aside, to illustrate the developer's approach to detail, they abandoned implementing the Coal Authority's recommending method for dealing with a mine shaft, which is capping it, because they couldn't find it. I feel like I'm dealing with my kids here. I want to say, are you sure you've had a proper look? That's not good enough, colleagues. I have zero doubt that you will receive much reassurance that this is all par for the course. We know as councillors what it's like to be bombarded with detail that we later realise wasn't sufficient. This is one of those times. No matter what is said here today, no one knows where the mine entrance actually is. No one knows how its effects will be mitigated, which means no one knows with certainty the layout of the site. That is not good enough, colleagues. No doubt we'll also see here a discussion of let's put a lot of conditions on for the developer to discharge later. I'm saying you don't have enough information to do even that. What we're left with is a lot of detail that masks quite a lot of important unanswered questions, dressed up with a lot of reassurance, and then, as a sop to you, the committee, we're saying that we will deal with all these important details later, out of sight and out of mind. That is not good enough, colleagues. Planning and modern building contracts refine detail as they go along. outlined planning, reserved matters, conditional discharge. It doesn't go outline planning, tick the box for reserved matters, then do all the important stuff at the end on a conditional discharge. I urge you to make the right choice and require the developer to think again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kenyon. Has anybody got any questions of Councillor Kenyon? Before we go into the debate, could I ask Mr. Richards to make any comments, some comments?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the start really on this one, in terms of where Mr. Dickman set off at the start of this item. As a planning committee, you are here to determine an application for reserved matters on appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. That is all. While I appreciate that the outline to reserve matters, conditional discharge process can be confusing, can be less than ideal, should we say. It is the system we have as a planning system in this country, and we have to work within it. So many of the matters that are being raised with concerns tonight are not matters for this reserved matters application. They are matters for discharge of condition. So I just want to reiterate that tonight, and including many of the things that have been said tonight by different speakers. We need to come back to the application before us and decide it on appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. If, as a consequence of some of the discharge of condition applications down the line, or responses from people like the Coal Authority, issues do arise, then as Mr. Dickman said earlier, the applicant will have to come in with a new application if that changes this layout. And they won't be able to start on certain aspects of this development until those conditions are discharged. So these matters are not being ignored, they are being dealt with, but they are separate from what you are, as a committee, are being asked to consider. And you have to consider the application before you with the information available at the current time.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
So just for clarity, what you are saying is what reason Councillor Kenyon and Jane Barker has raised. This is not the points that we need to deal with. Is that what you're saying?
Some of the points that have been raised, yes, are ones that are not for us to deal with. So things like what has been raised about the Coal Authority, that's not a matter for tonight. Drainage, that's not a matter for tonight. Ecology has been dealt with through conditions on the hybrid and outline application, as are several other matters. So it's focusing on what is proposed as a layout, the appearance of that, how it interrelates with what's already there around the site, and landscaping matters.
Thank you. Councillor Alan Downey.
With regard to the layout of the plan that's up in front of us, could you give us an indication of how much of that layout would be impacted by the zone of influence of the mine works?
Yeah, wrong mouse.
Just while Graham's looking at that, we will answer the question for you, but again, to be clear, that's not relevant to deciding this application tonight. Because the matter will be resolved separately. So, and we have to determine it on what we have at the moment. So, as Mr. Dickman outlined earlier, there is not an actual objection at the current time from the Coal Authority. There is, we want more information in order to discharge the condition. Based upon what we have at the moment, there is no reason to believe that will ultimately cause an issue to this layout. And so we have to determine this layout on its merits tonight.
Okay, through you, Chair. I don't know if you can make out the cursor. It's this area of the site, kind of northwesty area of the site. There's about, perhaps these couple of properties are the ones which fall within that zone of influence. So as you can see, it affects part of the site itself, and the Coal Authority could still, and I think this is the other important issue, is that they've said we object to the current measures that are being proposed, but they're not saying there isn't a solution. Until they say there isn't a solution, that condition should still be discharged. But again, I suppose the other, following up on that issue, is that the matter is, this relates to a very small part of the site itself. So a large parcel of it is not affected by that coal mine shaft at all. So, yeah, I think that's mainly the point. But that's the area that we're talking about. It affects probably half a dozen properties at most on that particular issue of the mine shaft. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Oldham.
Thank you, Chair. I presume this refers to the layout. I'm just trying to get this straight in my head. So you want the committee to agree to this, even though the Coal Authority don't agree to the layout, but we're agreeing to it. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense in regard to most of the applications that go through this committee, certainly applications of any magnitude, always have conditions associated with them to be discharged, whether it be through United Utilities on drainage, or whether it be through, in this case, particularly the coal board, or many other people that contribute. So this is nothing at all unusual. This is really par for the course. Mr. Rick?
Yeah, I mean, just to answer your question, this council's planning committee has already decided the principle of developing this site for housing subject to a condition involving the Coal Authority. So it's not about, that's why it's not an issue for tonight. We effectively have already made that decision subject to that condition being discharged. And so we're asking that this condition, that this application for reserved matters be considered on the assumption that that condition will be discharged in the future. If it's not discharged, the development can't go ahead. Does that make sense?
So if we agree the layout and the Coal Authority don't like it, it'll get kicked out.
They won't be able to implement the current permission if that, and so they will have to come in with a revised scheme that the Coal Authority are agreeable to, in terms of the layout and in terms of dealing with the coal shaft if there is one, mine shaft if there is one.
I think it's just, I mean, you could even widen that out a little bit, is that if you ever do anything or you build anything, there's planning you have to deal with, there's building regs you have to deal with, you have to get your drainage connections sorted out and so forth. It may well be that one of those elements is not achievable, which means you have to rethink your plans to deal with that. But the relevant bodies who are dealing with each of those areas can only look at those areas. The National Planning Guidance is quite clear that we can't replicate other authorities, other legislation. You know, if you need a food licence or whatever and you can't obtain one, getting planning permission for your cafe, you can't implement it. And it's the same issue here, that if they subsequently, at the moment, the Coal Authority is saying, we're not happy with what you're proposing to do. Until the Coal Authority come back and say, it can't be done, full stop, it potentially could be done, and we can't refuse an application on that basis because they've got to discharge the condition. We want the Coal Authority and Environmental Health and everybody else to say to us, get to a stage, right, we're now happy with that, we discharge that condition. If they can't discharge the condition, they can't implement it. And that's how the planning system works. And as Peter said, it can be quite confusing because there isn't just one element of an approval that you need to adhere to.
Councillor Allender.
Thank you. The development proposals here are for phased development. So without that Coal Authority sort of approval, can any of those phases take place?
Well, yes, because it's only the areas of the site that would require the Coal Authority's approval. So if they need a licence of them, so if there are areas that don't need their licence, then quite clearly they're not covered by that. So it would only be those particular properties. Yeah.
Councillor Allender.
And to then follow up to that, I'm struggling to explain myself clearly because it's complicated, and I think I take it very seriously, and that is why I'm trying to make sure that this is done properly, Chair. I am not looking for excuses. I am trying to make sure this gets done properly, and I resent the implication that anything is otherwise.
I'm sorry, there was no implication. You just seem to be struggling in where to go and what to actually bring out.
Okay.
So we're very happy, and obviously I've let the discussion go on, and I'm happy for the discussion to go on. But basically, I think a lot of the elements that have been raised have been answered. And if there's new elements that you wish to raise, please do so.
Thank you, Chair. If phases have been built and then the layout has to change in order to accommodate something else, we've already built some of that layout, and there is. Please explain to me what happens if the layout had to change and some of the layout has already been built. If it was not possible to kind of satisfy that discharge of conditions with the built elements of the site, what happens?
Yeah, I think I follow the point that's being made there. So, for instance, if you had a house, this condition on says you can't occupy that house until the access road that serves that house has been provided. If it subsequently turns out that access road can't be provided, then clearly you can't occupy that house till such time. Ultimately, that's the developer's risk. If they want to construct it, because the condition says it requires you to do something before you occupy it. If they jump and do that, because obviously the developer's got to get the thing in there, and it's subsequently fine, they'll have to find either another way of occupying that house, or they've got a big problem. But as I indicated before, the properties that are affected here are actually on the edge of this development. So I can certainly see your point if we were dealing with the main access point into the site, and then it subsequently turned out they can't build the road where that's being provided, but that's not what we're dealing with in this instance. So they are on the edge. They could build up to where they don't need it licensing, to where they've got discharge of condition. Obviously, if they can't discharge that, they're not going to be able to complete that area of the site. And I think that's the way it would lay
out. In terms of the phasing then, because the completion of the link road is part of the later phasing, would this have any impact on that?
Yeah, probably confuse matters with that. It's not the applicant's intention that the link road will be a later phase. It is that they can provide a certain number of new houses before it's completed. So obviously, it links into one end of that link road links into Knowles Lane. So that bit's got to be constructed. They can't occupy, apart from the 8 on the front, they can't occupy any of the others served off that layout until that element of the road. But they don't have to put the whole road in. They do have to put the whole road in before the 45 is exceeded. But my understanding is that the applicant would not be waiting for that to happen. They would be getting on with that work whilst they're doing the first phase of the development. Chair.
Does anybody else want to contribute? Councillor Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted some clarity on a point that a document that I've not seen that the High Court said should be included at this stage, which is the low carbon strategy. I'm just wondering if that's been considered.
It's included. I did mention in the presentation about the local policy and the need for that. It's an element within the design framework that's been put forward, and it is satisfied as part of the scheme. As I say, I think the High Court challenge was a point that was added to the original challenges, which was, has that been considered? The judge basically said, yes, it has. It's part of the condition that requires them to provide those details, and that condition is being discharged in terms of this layout. It has to be discharged in terms of all of them as the development moves on. So if statutory requirements change over time, they would have to deal with that. So yes, I'm satisfied that that has been dealt with.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just, pardon the pun, but I think we're going all around the houses here with this discussion, and I'm conscious not to repeat things that we've already repeated, because I don't think the answers are going to be any different. We could ask the same question many different ways, but I think the answers are not changing from the officers. So, for me, I think to approve this application with all of the missing information that the residents, the ward councillors, some of the planning committee members have raised would be a dereliction of our duty, really. We are not here to satisfy the applicants or the developers. We're here to demand the best applications and the best developments for the borough. So we're past the point of principle stage. There's nothing we can do about that, even though the next application says that Opal should be considered and we should not accept developments on Opal, and this one's on Opal, but back in 2019 that was fine.
So could you keep to what's on the agenda?
Well, it is on the agenda, it's the next item, but the fact is I'm not happy with this application, but I don't think I can say anything else that will change anybody's mind, so councillors will make their own decision, but I don't think we should be approving it.
Is there any contributions at all? No? Councillor Landowner.
Thank you, Chair. I have to state, because I don't seem to have had a clear answer on it, the Coal Authority have said that they have not been consulted on this application. They're a statutory consultee. Until that's cleared up, I'm not prepared to approve this, and I would at least recommend that it is deferred until that lack of clarity between what the Coal Authority are saying and what the council officers are saying is resolved.
Sorry, I have to reiterate. I've had correspondence with the Coal Authority. They have been consulted. They're aware of this application. Whether they were consulted, when they were consulted, whether it was on this application, whether it was on the condition discharge, they've been consulted. Not only have they been consulted, they've given us their current comments on it. I'm not sure what deferral, for instance, would do beyond that. I think what we need to explain, and we've said it separately on a number of occasions, you can only look at the issues that are directly related to the reserved matters, not to the condition discharge. They still need to do that separately. Planning authorities should not determine applications on the basis of other matters. I think you obviously members were told about the cost award earlier on, where other issues are brought in that are not directly relevant to that scheme or which don't, weren't put forward previously and so forth. If this application, there is no benefit in, for instance, deferral of a scheme because the matter that, with respect, Councillor Almond and Danny, you suggest it's been for, is still needed to be dealt with under a linked process. So this application, this proposal can be determined. That doesn't prevent it. That's the way, as Peter said before, that's how the planning system in this country actually works. It doesn't have, you've got one permit, that's what you need to do. You have various phases, and it's organised in that way for a purpose. That means that this developer, when they came first initially forward, doesn't have to have done everything at that stage, with the possibility that they might not get approval. So I think that's the point I'm making, is that I see what you're saying. I know exactly what the Coal Authority are saying in terms of this particular scheme, but they're consulted on the condition discharge. For them to discharge it, they need to be aware of that. They can't do it otherwise. The two things are linked, but the final decision is under that process, not this particular one.
Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. We've had quite a lengthy debate and discussion on this application, and right at the beginning, Martin said to us that there was an appeal made against the council, and we heard what the appeal outcome has been also. So really, and I share the concerns of the local residents of the area. However, it's not in the gift of this committee tonight that if we do refuse it, we know where it will end up, and we know where what the outcome is going to be. So with all that in mind, and again I'll say that I do share the concerns of the residents, but really for us to consider to either refer this or defer this in any way or even refuse it, I think that would be detrimental to the council. So with that in mind, I would move that we move the recommendation of the officers.
Is that seconded? Thank you. Is there any speakers? Councillor Allen.
I proposed deferral before we moved, and we seem to have moved on from that to proposing acceptance.
It wasn't actually seconded.
I'll second it, Mr. Chairman.
On what grounds?
Thank you. I'm proposing deferral because I still do not feel comfortable that I have had a clear confirmation that there is... The Coal Authority did not say, we do not expect to be consulted on this. They said, we have not been consulted on this. And I know, Mr. Dickman, that you're saying that they have been... But that's not what they've said, and therefore there is a lack of clarity on this. I'm not asking to refuse the application. I am saying I am not comfortable with that, and I would like that to be resolved.
Mr.
Okay, just to draw a line under this to a point. You know, first of all, I think, I'm not sure you did propose it. You said you would propose a deferral, not that you actually were saying, I am proposing a deferral here on the basis of this. However, notwithstanding that, and obviously it's the Chair's decision whether he takes that forward or not, I would reiterate that there has to be a reasonable reason for deferring the application. Bearing in mind that the applicant has a right to appeal for non-determination, given the time that has passed since the application has been submitted, if they feel that we're being unreasonable in what we're doing. As we have outlined, the issue of what the Coal Authority's comments may be is not relevant for the reserve matters. They have seen the proposals, they have been engaged, they have responded. So, in that sense, they have been consulted, they are aware of it, they have been engaged. And any planning inspector, I would say, in that situation, would say that is entirely unreasonable for us to defer it on that basis, when it's not a material matter for the reserve matters decision. So, I'll leave it for the Chair to take forward that.
But you know, in fairness, we'll take the deferral vote, but I would strongly recommend members to vote against deferral, but I will take the deferral vote. Those in favour of deferral, please show. That's 4 votes for. Those against deferral, please show. That's 2, 4, 6, 7 against. And now if we could go on to the mover, Councillor Hussain, and seconded by Councillor Harrison, that this development is approved with the appropriate conditions as outlined within the report. All those in favour of approval, please show. That's 2, 4, 6, 7. Those against approval? That's 4 against. So the application is approved. Thank you. If we can go on to the next item on the agenda, which is Maltby Court Lees, and Stephen Gill, who's the planning officer responsible, will outline this application to us.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. First of all, I'd like to just draw your attention to the late list, which provides details of the updated housing land supply position, which is improving and strengthens the reason for refusal in this case, or recommendation for reason for refusal. The late list also contains Greater Manchester Ecology Unit's latest comments, details of further representations we have received since the publication of the agenda, and some amendments to the committee report. So if you haven't taken a look, I'd just urge you to have a quick look at those. Thank you. Some technical issues. So the scheme in this case is a full application for 40 residential units on a site designated as being within open protected other land under Opal 11. The site also sits within a green corridor and the Thornley Brook NSN, which is identified as natural/semi-natural open space. The site is located in the village of Lees, which is east of Oldham. The site is in a regular shaped parcel of land that is effectively flat with a gentle slope to the southwest. It measures approximately 1.3 hectares in size and is currently absent of any development. Access to the site is located to the west of Maltby Court, and the immediate surroundings are characterised by detached red brick housing to the east. So as you can see there, the site access is taken from Maltby Court into the site here, and obviously this is the proposed layout. And beyond the site boundary here is the remainder of Opal 11, and the green corridor runs along the boundary here. So the proposed layout incorporates a mixture of 3 and 4 bed homes in both a detached and semi-detached format. The separation distances and garden spaces are considered acceptable, and the levels on site have been carefully considered. The properties are of very similar size, height and scale to those in the immediate surroundings. The following slides give you a flavour of the house types proposed. So it gives you a flavour of the house types proposed for the site. And this is just a street scene which shows the relationship between the development and the existing levels. During the application process, the applicant did not specify the materials to be used for the new homes. However, this matter could be reasonably conditioned. And as set out in the committee report, the layout and house types on offer enough variation and interest to be considered as acceptable. So as set out in the committee report, the proposal also involves some landscape and ecology benefits. New footpaths will be created through the site and in the wider area, both to the north and south of the wider site, which will make areas of Opal 11 more accessible. So that's the development site here. If you can see that cursor, there's footpaths coming through here and then out to the north and out to the south, providing linkages both north and south of the site. And there's also a bridge to be constructed over Thornley Brook, providing better accessibility to this site. There's also an area of wildlife habitat creation going to be sort of delivered in this aspect of the site here. So just to move on, so the scheme will also deliver in excess of 10% biodiversity net gain through both on- and off-site landscape and ecology work. And this will include, 1, an area of semi-improved grassland, which will be off-site with additional planting. 2, invasive species will be removed to encourage and enable growth of existing broadleaf woodland. 3, 26 new trees will be planted on site, along with shrub planting, and a considerable number of hedgerows would also be planted around the site. And 4, a new area of wildlife habitat would also be delivered off-site to encourage new wildlife to the area. These are benefits that weigh in favour of the development in the planning balance. As also set out in the committee report, no on-site affordable housing or replacement open space of a typology needed is proposed. Instead, a contribution of £65,000 is on offer to mitigate for the loss of an area identified as open space, as well as provision for new open space and affordable housing. The contribution was established through a viability appraisal of the development costs. Whilst the Council understands the viability constraints of the site, this financial contribution is considered to be very low for the reasons set out in the committee report. Therefore, whilst the Council understands the viability constraints of the site, given that no on-site affordable housing is proposed and the developer contributions are considered to be low, this was not considered to weigh in favour of the development in the planning balance. Moving on to highways, the Highways Engineer and Unity Partnerships, as well as Transport for Greater Manchester, have worked closely with the applicant to devise a suitable package of highway improvement works, which will take place on Maltby Court. As set out in the committee report, the highways works will include the following: visibility displays at the site entrance between Maltby Court and Rhodes Hill. So that's at the site here. A pedestrian crossing will be implemented over Maltby Court with tactile paving and drop curbs, which would be here and here. The grass verges on Maltby Court near the entrance to the site will be changed to tarmac to allow for a continuous footpath in and out of the site, which is down here. I'm sorry the image isn't very big, but I think that's here as well. And the curb radii fronting 30 Maltby Court will be increased with a full curb, so that's here. Overall, the Highways Engineer and Unity Partnerships are satisfied with the details submitted in the transport assessment. Therefore, subject to the delivery of the highways improvement works, there was no reasonable grounds to recommend refusal of the application on highways grounds. Finally, there are several material planning considerations, both for and against the application, which should be weighed up when making a decision on this application. Just to be clear, the matters in favour of the application include the provision for housing and the type of housing proposed, which will assist in meeting the Council's housing land supply and also address an ongoing tenure need. 2, the scheme will deliver a number of landscape and ecological benefits, as just described. And 3, the development demonstrates in excess of 10% biodiversity net gain, which is clearly a benefit. The matters not considered to be in favour of the application include the development's erosion of 1.5% of Opal land, which in our view would result in piecemeal development of Opal 11. 2, the development would result in the loss of part of an area identified as natural and semi-natural open space. 3, whilst the financial constraints of the site are understood and accepted, the level of contributions available for the replacement of open space provision, new open space provision and affordable housing provision is considered to be very low. And 4, the low to medium adverse landscape and visual impacts of the development, which have been identified by the applicant's own consultant. Opal 11 is considered to have local significance due to its beauty, tranquility, wildlife, recreational value and historic significance. Whilst the application only relates to a small portion of the Opal, the incremental erosion of this will adversely impact the overall significance of the designation. In addition, with Oldham's housing land supply position and deliverability improving, as set out on the committee report and the late list, all these factors together mean that the matters not in favour of the application have been given significant weight in the planning balance, and therefore it is considered that the benefits of the scheme do not outweigh the harm, and for that reason the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Has any members, Councillor Woodbine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as a word of warning, I'm being a bit facetious with this question. In 2019, when we, well, not we, I wasn't here then, but when the committee approved the Knowles Lane application, the officers and members of the committee used as a justification for approving it that there was targets and demands set by the Conservative government which meant we had to build more houses. But this obviously contradicts that. So am I to assume the targets no longer exist if we don't have to build houses now?
You can assume that this council has actually responded and got up to 91% of the actual numbers that the Conservative government are demanding, and that's why the position has changed quite significantly over that period of time. So that's where we're at. We're reaching, and of course the government target is that we have to get over 80%, so we're actually overachieving the 80%. Mr. Richards.
Yeah, just to be clear, I mean, setting aside the politics on that as an officer, the bottom line is, at that point, when that decision was reached, obviously I wasn't at the council at the time, but our 5-year housing land supply position was extremely poor, and there was no basis on which to therefore refuse that particular planning application. As Mr. Gills just outlined, the housing land supply position for this council has improved dramatically, and when you and that's because this council has allowed more housing to go ahead, and that has been built, or has been given permission at least, and that's all factoring into our delivery of the past few years and our supply going forward over the next 5 years to improve that position. On top of that, we're now in a position where the Places for Everyone joint plan has been submitted for examination, which sets sets new targets for Oldham in a stepped requirement, and under that we have more than a 6-year supply, so we're significantly exceeding what is required under that requirement. So even though that's not adopted yet, it's right to give that some weight because it is at examination now. So I appreciate the confusion, if you like, or the difficulty understanding what the change, but that is the situation then. The situation now is a lot better, and it means we can defend applications in relation to housing on Opal land.
Is there any further questions of the officer? No? Okay, if we then go to the speakers on this item, an objector is Hannah Jackson. If you could follow the process, which is 3 minutes, and you'll be given a reminder with 30 seconds to go.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to start this conversation by reiterating that this is a proposed development on Opal, and it's a departure application, so as such there is a presumption against development, and the starting point must be that there will be no development. But I actually listened with great interest to the previous application, which is very close to this Opal land as well, and I noted the planning officer's comments on the necessity for continuous footway along Knowles Lane. Knowles Lane becomes Rhodes Hill a matter of metres down the road, yet we have objected in the strongest possible terms about the lack of any continuous footway for pedestrians without having to cross on a blind bend in order to access Lees or the local school that is subject to that planning application. And I think that matter does need to be taken into account because it suggests some sort of discord between the two planning applications, because on the one hand one is saying yes, absolutely there needs to be a continuous footway, and on the other hand that point has been entirely dismissed by highways, so that is a concern for residents. It's evident from the planning officer's report, fuelled by the multitude and magnitude of public objections, that the proposed development falls woefully short of overcoming the presumption against development, bearing significant detriments to protected species and to the local communities whose voices I represent. I wish to make it clear that we're numerous. There are many of us. We will not stand idly by whilst our protected open spaces are threatened by developers seeking to destroy them. We have available to us people, resources and finance to rebut any appeal or new application. We'll oppose with scrutiny, knowledge and expert evidence. We will not be wavered. We object in the strongest possible terms for the reasons set out in the planning officer's report and on the portal. We share the same concerns that the number of objections don't seem to tally with the number of objections that have actually been sent out. I'm not entirely sure if with the change of planning officer whether there was if all of the emailed objections were counted. We are wholly opposed, and once again this is a departure application that fails to meet any objective benefit any objective benefit or loss assessment to build on Opal, and permission must therefore be refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions of the speaker? No? Thank you. The next speaker is Gillian Wooden. Sorry, I should have put my glasses on, but never mind. Okay, if you could speak, please, and follow the process.
Good evening, I'm Gillian. I'm from P4 Planning. I'm the planning consultant for the application. We've been working collaboratively with the council over the last 2 years to bring forward this development, and we've taken into consideration comments received from the urban design and highway officers in particular. We're really disappointed to see that it was recommended for refusal despite the significant benefits that are going to be delivered, not least the contribution to your housing land supply, but also the biodiversity net gain and the opening up of additional land to the public. We recognise that the site forms part of Opal 11, which extends to 98 hectares. This application site is 1.37 hectares, approximately 1.5% of the Opal. And whilst the Opal 11 adheres to the green space criteria that Stephen set out about beauty and recreation and heritage, the application site does not. It's in private ownership, it's not accessible, and it's overrun with invasive species. These issues, along with a number of the substantive benefits, will be addressed as part of this proposal. As you will be aware, there is a national housing crisis. Insufficient levels of housing have been provided over many years, which has led to an overall lack of supply, particularly so in Oldham, and as a result, Oldham cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. I note on the late list about the change in the supply, and I must note that this and raise that this is a minimum requirement and not a maximum, and delivering houses on these sites also reduces the pressure of having to release greenbelt through the places for everybody. This site presents a valuable opportunity to deliver much needed housing, market housing, and it will be delivered by Wiggett Construction, who are a local firm to Oldham. Wiggett are able to deliver the site quickly and give a significant boost to the local housing supply. The scheme represents an £8.5 million investment by Wiggett, with 80% of the expenditure on local subcontractors and 70% expenditure on materials from local suppliers. There'll be delivery of jobs through the construction phase and spending power of local inhabitants contributing to the social and economic benefits of the scheme. These should be given great weight. The proposal also includes other significant benefits, such as a biodiversity net gain in excess of 10%, new public footpaths, the opening up of Opal 11, which is currently private and inaccessible, a new public footpath and bridge over Thornley Brook, the provision of 1,500 new trees in the wider area and 17,000 new shrubs and hedges to improve the beauty, health and well-being and recreational opportunities for local residents. The benefits of the scheme therefore significantly and demonstrably outweigh any harm caused, and when taking this into consideration with the Council's undersupply and lack of housing development, should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions of the speaker? No? Okay, thank you. Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the people who live on and around Maltby Court in Lees. I'm very happy to be able to commend Mr Gill's report to this committee. His recommendation that this application be refused is sound, well-researched and justified. The people who live on and near to Maltby Court were keen that I added further flesh to their opposition, much of which I know cannot be considered as a material objection, but nevertheless is important not just to them, but I imagine is immediately familiar to all of us, with many other communities throughout all our wards. Impact on local wildlife and ecology, combined with a lack of local doctors, schools, roads and transport, are repeated problems which our planning system doesn't seem to address within individual applications. These are the concerns which have motivated the residents and neighbours of Maltby Court to come together as a large, well-organised and well-financed group to present their unanimous objection to this development throughout every step of this application. That group remains in place and takes both support and experience from the campaigners involved in the previous application at Knowles Lane. Mr Gill's main concerns that the housing need is no longer sufficient to outweigh the importance of preserving Opal land is well reasoned and clearly demonstrated. He also points out that the applicant's argument that the development could be justified because they are providing new leisure facilities in the form of footpaths is not convincing. The 65 grand on offer from the developer as a replacement open space contribution is well short of the policy compliant 310 grand figure. For all these reasons, I would encourage you all to agree with the officer's report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions of Councillor Kenyon? If not, I'll throw it open for debate, our resolution.
Page 25, on the introduction it says, under the recommendation it says application to be approved.
No, I should have opened the meeting by apologising. The original version went out with a misprint on it. Although the context of the report was for refusal, it was actually corrected both through emails, and there was an extra page slotted into the papers. You're a bit behind, but never mind. I can say what's new, but I wouldn't ever dare to that. Any other contributions at all? Councillor Allen Downey?
I realise that the recommendation is for refusal at the moment. I know there's crossings in the proposals on Maltby Court. There's no crossings on Rhodes Hill. And I know that the highways officer isn't here. I mean, this is all really hypothetical, but I wanted to raise it in case this comes back in some form. It would seem, from my knowledge of the area, that actually a crossing on Rhodes Hill would be very appropriate. Is there a reason why not, and why it was just on Maltby Court?
Obviously, I wasn't part of the discussions with the highways engineer and the applicant together. What we've been presented with is what Unity Partnerships, the highways engineer and TFGM have come together to devise this scheme. And once it's put together like this, it's in terms of the test for highways is severe. If you wanted to refuse the application, the test will be severe. In terms of what they've been proposed here, they don't have any objections to it on highways grounds. In terms, I don't know why or what's been proposed on Rhodes Hill, but it wasn't deemed necessary to be part of the highways scheme.
If there's no further comments, could I move the officer's recommendation to refuse? Is that seconded? All those in favour? Thank you. So that was refused unanimously. If we could go on to the last item of the night, which is just a run of and where we're up to with the appeal situation, and it's just for noting. I don't know whether anybody's got any comments. We've already been through the controversial one at the beginning of the meeting. If not, thanks very much indeed for your attendance, and I'll see you next week.